name is Wamae Kamiru Collymore, and I am an installation artist, which means that I give experiences within a particular space, and I use all sorts of objects, usually everyday objects. My favorite way, or my favorite elements, are actually repetition and skill. My new work is All My Venus Days, and this show opens in February 2022. The work itself focuses on the processing of grief, and I chose the particular title, All My Venus Days, because on Venus, the length of a day is 116 days and 18 hours of Earth Day. And I wanted to talk about the process through time and how time is an important element of grieving. The work that I have created is work I have been processing over the last 2 years, almost 3 years. And the first iteration of it was actually in a smaller work, which was presented at Circle Art here in Nairobi. And the work was titled Pray for Us as We Reply, Forward, Delete, and Archive. And that particular work looked at the migration crisis and how we as consumers of news don't necessarily take the time to process all the things that are happening when it comes to loss. And this could be loss in terms of the family having to make the decision to cross the ocean. It can also be loss in the fact that sometimes people don't make it across the ocean. So I looked at the work initially from a global perspective. And this was way before we had the global pandemic that is Corona. And since then, this work has become even more important because grief has become a universal experience. We all know one person who we have lost through somebody else, as death has become closer to us. In my particular work, All My Venus Days, I am processing the loss of my husband, who died 3 years ago. And in it, I show the experience of the grief when we found out that he had cancer, and the time that we were working through his hospitalization and his healing, and then leading up to the point where he actually died. And then I further take it by processing the time after his death up to where we are today. And I hope to be able to express this within this particular work. Of course, this work is an evolving piece. Most of my work actually does end up having various iterations, but I do hope that people will find some sort of solace within the work, or clarity, or the ability to question their own losses, whether those are losses related to people they love, or losses related to dreams, or losses related to just, being human. And since grief is such a human thing, I feel we can dig a lot from it, and we can learn to appreciate life a lot more from the processing of grief. As much as this work is about my personal processing of grief, I want to open up the space to people who come and see the exhibition. And so I am requesting that if you have lost somebody, or if you have lost something that was precious to you, you come with a picture of it, passport size picture, and within the exhibition there'll be the opportunity to place that in the work itself, so that it evolves not just for me but also for the participants. I like work that also engages audiences, and in the past some of my work has had the ability to, you could sit inside the installation and eat, or you can move pieces around. And I love the interaction that people have with the work, because I think art cannot be created in isolation. It's created within a community and within that community's experience. So please bring a photograph of what is precious to you that you have lost, or that you want to place within the particular exhibition, with reference specifically to grieving and the process of grief. Someone might ask why I would choose to present my work about such a personal emotion, feeling, state. And I would probably say that the reason I have chosen to do so is because this is my form of expression. I'm an artist. It's something that I am, and it's something that I live. So I guess to get to the next stage, or to grow, or to be, or to clarify for myself, this is the only form that I could think of, which was to present this work. I had a conversation with one of my favorite artists, Yowia Kiambi, and we actually talked about whether you can create work, and if you do a performance within that piece, whether you can make it personal so that you're the only audience member, you're the participant and the audience member, and whether that would be an option for this particular experience. And I have to say that initially I was tempted by that idea, and I think there are particular elements of the work which will be done, just me and the work itself, and documented because it's part of my process. But for this particular part of it, I felt I want to put it out there. I want to put it out there because I think there's a lot we can learn from the death of somebody who was so important to me, and in some ways really influenced what this country has become. And because he wasn't just mine, because I think he belonged to all of us, I wanted to bring my community into the work, and I wanted my community to experience the particular work. But I also wanted to provide a space for my community to heal of their own grief. And that's why I decided to present this as a public work, because I think an element of grief as well is that, yes, you're alone in the process, but you come through the process because the person that you are grieving is no longer there. So that makes it that it's not you alone, but that you're in it with other people. You're in it with the person who, what comes to mind is another conversation I had with a good friend of mine. And I told him that I was missing my husband. And he said something that actually set this work in motion for me. And he said, I'm sure he's missing you too. And I hadn't realized that I'm not alone, that the person I have lost could also be experiencing the grief. And because he could also be experiencing the grief, then it's amplified, because he's not just missing me, he's also missing, his mother, his sister, he's missing his colleagues, he's missing all these other people. And I thought to bring those people into the work, to allow them time within the work, and hopefully to sort of like hold hands and walk through the process together. All My Venus Days has got various elements, and each of these elements is about time and creating the particular works. I processed the work over 9 months initially, and then after that over 2 years and a half, to the point that we are at right now. And initially when we got the diagnosis that my husband had cancer, I began to think about the one thing that I could do that would help me document it, because there was so much that was happening. There was so much that I was having to process in terms of, a medical regime, a diet regime, different things that are related to taking care of somebody who is sick. And because I was having to be 100% on point over those things, I wasn't particularly able to go through the emotional part of taking care of him, being a primary caretaker. And then also towards his death, we were preparing for what that process would entail. So I wasn't able to really process what it would be like to live without him. And so I decided to document it so that I would be able to come back to it and look at the material and go step by step. Because I think it's important that when you go through a major life change, that you're able to understand the details of how you got to where you are now. And I think that helps with resolution, it helps with closure. And so I started to take pictures of outside, because we were in his hospital room most of the time. And I started to take pictures of outside because outside marked time. we were in London, and London shows season very clearly. So you've got very well-defined summers, very well-defined autumns and winter. And so one of the elements actually is 30 days documenting the season outside. And you can see London changing from autumn, because we arrived there on October 20th, to winter, when we finally left the hospital room for the first time. He was isolated for 30 days straight. And it's interesting. I mean, just using the word isolation, I realized that 2 years ago I've had to explain what that was. But now, globally, we know and understand what isolation is. And in some ways, then, you see outside changing, and you are in a space, and you're locked in that space. And your area might not change necessarily. You know, your bed's is in the same position, but outside changes. And grieving is like that. You're in the experience, but the world still continues. The world still moves. So there's that element of looking out his window and looking at the seasons changing. The other thing that I found interesting was time, that time doesn't stop. And that time is documented most perfectly with a clock. So what I did is I took pictures of the clock. Every time that I walked into his room, I would take a picture of the clock. And you can see it in one of the works where the time is moving, even though it's a stationary image. One of the skills that I have been able to perfect is embroidery. I had done embroidery before on other works, which was, you know, embroidery on paper, but I had the opportunity to, I guess what I would call, perform female domestic labor, which is to actually sit down and sew and do some embroidery. Traditional, I should clarify and say traditional female domestic labor. And I took poems that I had written from his death until this period of time and embroidered them on his work shirts. And these are what I would define as his daily uniform. He worked as the CEO of a corporation here in Kenya, and his daily outfit involved having these shirts, and these shirts he took such great care of. And so, you know, I wanted to take care of them in the exact same way. I wanted to honor these pieces that were part of his uniform in the same way that you can compare him to being like a soldier. This was his identifier. And so I took some of his white shirts, which I absolutely find, I guess, maybe I'd say holy, partly because of the color and the illumination of how I present them in the work. And I embroidered the poetry on his shirt. Now these will stand in a space within the work, and the lighting around them is sort of to pay homage to him and to present that he is in the space. And I hope that when people come across this particular element of the work, they will feel his presence within the space. I think it's very important to note that when you approach this work, there's some emotions that are I'd consider unhelpful to a person who is grieving. And one of these emotions is, you know, when someone looks at a person who's grieving and what they have is a sense of pity, or a sense that, you know, the person is, you know, disabled or has got some sort of debilitating something that they're going through. And when people come to this work, I don't want you to come approaching it from a place of pity. Pity is not helpful. I want you to approach it from a place of empowerment, because what the work does is it allows me to express a love. The reason I'm creating this work is not because I'm coming from a place of sadness. It's specifically because I'm coming from a place of love. And love is not something that you pity. Love is something that you cherish and you enjoy. And I think generally when dealing with someone who is grieving, approach them knowing that they are experiencing grief because they have a lot of love, and the person that they would have ordinarily given it to is just not present. So grief is the emotion that fills a space that was once occupied by love for a particular person.